Year 11 mock, paper 1, living with the physical environment. Here we go.
Now then, this first question is literally just testing to see if you've done any revision. It says, which type of plate margin is shown in figure 1? Well, as I say, if you've done some revision, you will know that this is a constructive plate margin where two plates are moving away from each other. Obviously, we know a destructive margin, that's where two plates are moving towards each other, and a conservative margin is where two plates are moving past each other. And transform is just the same as a conservative margin. So that's the first one. Now here we go. Describe one way that continental crust is different from oceanic crust. Well, you literally just need to say one of these things. So you could have said that continental crust is older, could have said it's thicker, it's less dense, can't sink, or any of the other ones up there. You literally just need to write one of those things there, and then you've got 2 out of 2. Now for question 1.3, we've been given 2 photographs. One showing us the aftermath of an earthquake in a wealthy country, and one of us showing us a relief camp after an earthquake in a poorer country. And we've got to use these 2 figures and our own knowledge to explain how the response to a tectonic hazard might be different in the wealthy country compared to a poorer country. So I've got some ideas here for you. So obviously in a wealthy country, they're likely to be able to respond a lot quicker and have better emergency services, such as search and rescue teams. And they might also have good infrastructure, such as roads and communications. Whereas obviously in a poorer country, the emergency services might not be quite as fast to respond because they don't have as much money, not quite as good, not quite as effective. It might take a bit longer because the road network might not be as substantial as well in a poorer country. So that might be one thing that affects the immediate responses. Secondly, we've got, in a wealthy country, the government is obviously going to be a little bit better able to rehouse people, rebuild homes and provide accommodation. Whereas in the poorer country, the government doesn't have quite as much money, the people there don't have as much money, it takes longer to rebuild their houses, and therefore, as you can see in figure 3, lots of people might end up in temporary accommodation, as you can see there. So there's some ideas you could get down to get 3 or 4 out of 4. Now moving on to question 1.4. It says study figure 4, which gives information about the weather conditions in a town in southern England during the first 2 weeks of December 2010. And you've got to calculate the mean daily precipitation during the time period shown in figure 4. So all you need to do, add up the numbers in the column for precipitation, divide it by 14, and that'll give you the answer of 2 millimetres. And for question 1.5, it says, which of the following weather hazards is most likely to occur in the conditions shown in figure 4? Well, obviously the temperatures are looking pretty low at sort of 1, 2, 3 degrees, some in the negatives. So it's not going to be a heat wave. It's unlikely to be a thunderstorm either because the temperatures are really low. Precipitation is also quite low, so it's unlikely to be heavy rain. So ice is going to be the best option to go for if you want the mark for it. Moving on briefly to question 1.6. It's giving you a graph which is showing you the average area of sea ice in the Arctic in September between 1979 and 2016. And you've got to describe the change shown. Now the way you can get 3 marks pretty easily in this is by just saying that the sea ice extent fluctuated around 7 million between 1979 and 1977. So you can see there, it's about 7 million between that time period there. And then it fell to about 3.6 million in 2012. So in 2012, it's fallen to about 3.6 million, before it's recovered to about 4.7 by 2016. Now that's the best way, the easiest way to get you 3 marks. But the main thing you've got to remember here, if you want to get 2 or 3, you've got to quote some figures. And for question 1.7, we're still looking at climate change. We've got to complete the following sentences. So orbital changes may cause climate change because they affect the amount of energy or solar radiation the Earth receives. However, it's thought that humans are increasing the rate of global warming by increasing the concentration of greenhouse gases, or you could have put carbon dioxide in the atmosphere. Now lots of you got that carbon dioxide, quite a few of you put sunlight for the first one, which isn't strictly correct because what can happen is the orbit of the Earth around the Sun might change so that the Earth might move a little bit further away from the Sun. And that's not going to affect the amount of actual sunlight that the Earth receives, but it is going to affect the concentration of that sunlight, and therefore the energy or the solar radiation that the Earth receives. So therefore you need one of those 2 points there. And for 1.8 it says explain one way in which people can adapt to the effects of climate change. And if you remember that adaptation is when people respond to change to limit the impacts or to take advantage of the change. So it's not about trying to stop climate change happening, it's trying to respond to climate change. So the sort of things you could have put for that, you could have said things like people could adapt to the changing rainfall patterns and higher temperatures by using technology that makes sure that crop productivity doesn't decrease. So you could use things like biotechnology to create new crop types that are more resistant to extreme weather conditions such as drought. You could have put that people could adapt to water shortages by using water resources more efficiently, such as using water meters in their homes so they cut down on water use. You could have said they could adapt to rising sea levels by building flood defences to protect homes. That could include things like having houses on stilts or having flood barriers, etc. So you need to really talk about one of those things and just expand on it in a little bit more detail to get the marks for that.
Right, now this next one, it's not that easy, but bear with. You can get this one correct.
1.9. So it says, study figure 6, a map showing the global distribution of climatic zones. And it says, using figure 6 and your own knowledge, describe and explain the distribution of climatic zones. Now I've written describe and explain here because I need you to describe where these climatic zones actually are. So say where they are, but then also try and explain why they're found where they are. So there's 2 parts to this question. Now I'm going to talk you through each one. So the first one, if you look at the green, the tropical rainforests, you need to be saying that tropical rainforests are generally found on or near the equator. So that's describing where they are. Now in terms of trying to explain this, hopefully you know that temperatures are highest at the equator because that's where the sun's rays are most concentrated. And because temperatures are high, this results in rising air because air rises as it heats up. And when it rises, it loses its ability to hold water, and that results in heavy rainfall. So that is why you get rainforests at the equator, because you've got warm temperatures, rising air, which then releases its moisture. So that's why you get rainforests there. Now secondly, we've got at the tropics, we tend to get deserts, or the arid climatic zone. So I'd be saying that deserts tend to be found close to the tropics at 30 degrees north and 30 degrees south. Now the reason this is the case is because at the tropics you've got falling air, and that's because the air that has rose up at the equator has now looped back round and it's now falling. It's now cooled down and it's now falling at about 30 degrees north and south. And when air's falling, you get a high pressure belt, and this results in settled weather conditions with not much precipitation. And obviously because the tropics are still quite close to the equator, you still do get quite high temperatures. And the lack of cloud means that you get cold nighttime temperatures, but warm daytime temperatures. So that explains why the arid biome is where it is. Moving on, at about 50 to 60 degrees, this is where you tend to get the temperate climatic zone. And if you look on here, this is because you get cold air which is coming from the poles, and you get air which is coming from the tropics meeting each other at about 60 degrees. And because they meet each other, they force each other upwards. So here the air is rising, which creates low pressure on the ground, which therefore creates rainfall. And due to the fact that we're a little bit further away from the equator, and so the sun's rays are slightly less concentrated, it's therefore a lot cooler there. Hence why you get the temperate climatic zone here. And finally, at the poles, cold air is sinking because it's really cold because the sun's rays aren't concentrated. So this results in a lack of cloud cover. But because we're a long way from the equator, it means that we get really low temperatures. And then, as I said, because the air's sinking, you get low rainfall as well. And that's where you get the polar biome, as you can see on here. So right at the 2 poles. If you wanted to get 5 or 6 marks on this question, you might also need to mention some of the names of these cells. So where we're talking about the tropics, you might be talking about the Hadley and the Ferrel cells, or the polar cells when you're talking about the temperate and some of the other biomes as well. Okay, so some of those things there you might need to mention if you want to get 6 out of 6.